we have finally completed year one of the All Sports Promotion and Relegation League. There's now been 3 layers of changes, with first being the 2025 football, then the 2026 basketball, and then finally the 2026 baseball. And so now let's just get right into it, because if you guys saw part one, you'll understand the concept. But let's just go over it again. Basically, top 3 teams in each conference get promoted, and bottom 3 teams get relegated. And it goes the Big Ten is at the very top, and then the second tier is the SEC, then the Big 12, ACC, so on and so forth. And it even goes as far down as trading between the FBS independent level and the FCS level. And so let's just dive right into it, starting out with the teams that I think should be relegated to the FCS. Ball State, Delaware, Middle Tennessee, Georgia State, Sacramento State, UMass, and UTEP. Obviously, the only 2 new ones in comparison to the last video are Ball State and Middle Tennessee, who did just poor enough in this baseball season to now get relegated back down to the FCS. And I would also like to note, it's like, wait, but there's only 2, right? Well, the third was actually Villanova, who had been promoted in the basketball season, but Villanova was FCS already, so they're just going to be staying there, and they won't really get mentioned until they potentially get promoted again. But for now, these are the teams that are currently going to be FBS in the real life 2026 season, but I think should be relegated back down to FCS. Alright, and now let's move on to our FBS independents. Central Michigan, Kent State, Mercer, Montana, New Mexico State, North Dakota State, West Carolina, and Yale. Now, first off, let's go over our relegations, as these are the 3 that got relegated from Conference USA: Central Michigan, New Mexico State, and North Dakota State. The big things to really notice about this is that Central Michigan, I think actually for all 3 of these, this is only a net change of 1. Central Michigan and New Mexico State both has been in Conference USA since the beginning and have now just been relegated. Whereas North Dakota State started out at the FCS, and then when they announced they were moving to the FBS, they got moved to FBS Independent, and then they moved up to Conference USA because of basketball. Unfortunately, could not keep up during the baseball season. Now, something else to really note is that Kent State started out as an FBS independent at the very start of this and got relegated all the way back in 2025 football, but then they managed to earn their way back because of the 2026 baseball season. And so it's interesting to see that Kent State is right back where they started, but it's good that they are no longer in the relegated to FCS category. And then let's talk about our current FCS teams that have been promoted up here. Mercer and West Carolina, which just earned their way up due to their strong baseball programs. Montana, which earned their way here from their strong football. And Yale, who earned their way here from their strong basketball. And I'd also like to note that I will be somewhat simulating what a season would look like with these teams at the FBS level. And I'm essentially swapping schedules. Obviously, the 4 on the left are all actually going to be in the FBS, so there's nothing to discuss there. However, Mercer will be taking Ball State's schedule, West Carolina will be taking UTEP's schedule, and Montana will be taking UMass's schedule, and Yale will be taking Georgia State's schedule. And so I will be simulating through them so that for future promotion and relegations, they will be taken into account accordingly. And with that being said, let's move on to Conference USA. Air Force, Akron, Charlotte, Eastern Michigan, FAU, FIU, Illinois State, McNeese, Montana State, Southern Miss, Temple, UL Monroe, and Wyoming. This is such an interesting bunch for multiple reasons. For one, Akron, Eastern Michigan, and FIU just got relegated. FIU and Akron were actually at Conference USA at the start. They both got promoted at some point, and now they're back down to Conference USA. Whereas this is the first time that Eastern Michigan is changing conferences since we've started, and it's unfortunately a relegation. And I also would like to note that there are 3 current FCS programs that have made their way up to Conference USA. Illinois State and Montana State both earned their way from both football and basketball, whereas McNeese earned their way from basketball and baseball. And then there's also Southern Miss, who started out as an independent, earned their way to Conference USA because of football, got relegated back down because of basketball, and is now back up here because of baseball. So Southern Miss has been moving back and forth between Conference USA and the FBS Independent, and hopefully they'll actually end up staying. As for the other promotions, or the other promotion, which is UL Monroe, I believe they started out in the MAC and then got relegated twice, and now they're working their way back up. Nothing else really to say about the other schools, as they've only moved once or have been here the whole time. Moving on to the MAC, we have App State, Bowling Green, Georgia Southern, Kennesaw State, Louisiana Tech, Missouri State, Nevada, Old Dominion, Rice, San Jose State, Tulsa, UAB, and Western Michigan. Now, a couple of things to immediately note. Bowling Green and Georgia Southern started out in the Sun Belt at the very start of this, and they have already been relegated twice. So they are unfortunately making their way down. And then on the other side, we have Kennesaw State and Missouri State that started out as FBS independents, and they are making their full way up. So they're doing very well in this promotion and relegation, and hopefully they will find their spot that they will end up settling. And then there's Rice, who got relegated in basketball season and have earned their way back because of baseball. Old Dominion is just a net gain -1, because I believe in football they went up, in basketball they went down, and now they're going down again. So only a net difference by 1, but it's not all that bad. Next we have the Mountain West. Coastal Carolina, Colorado State, Fresno State, Hawaii, New Mexico, NIU, Oklahoma State, Oregon State, Purdue, San Diego State is what I was trying to say, South Alabama, Toledo, and Utah State. What's most interesting about this is how much this resembles a real-life Mountain West. So many of these teams were either former Mountain West teams, current Mountain West teams, or in the case of Oregon State, they were just like very affiliated with the Mountain West. It's like a hybrid of the current Mountain West and the new Pac-12, which I find really interesting. Also, another thing that's really interesting is that the exact combination of those that got promoted to the Mountain West got relegated in the football season. Coastal Carolina, Oklahoma State, and Oregon State all got relegated in the football season. They all stayed there in the basketball season, and then they're all moving back up because of the baseball season. So I found that to be very, very fascinating. And then looking at the teams that got just relegated down here, we got Fresno, who I think this is their first movement. New Mexico, who I think moved up twice and is now moving back down 1. And then there's Toledo, which I believe this is their first movement. Now moving on to the Sun Belt. Arkansas State, Buffalo, Florida State, Maryland, Mississippi State, North Texas, Northwestern, Sam Houston, Stanford, Troy, USF, UTSA, and Western Kentucky. What is most interesting about this Sun Belt group is that, for one, this is Florida State finally got out of the Mountain West. They were very close in nearly every season, and they finally were able to do it. They were finally able to get that promotion to the Sun Belt. Mississippi State, also this is their first time moving. So, and also something to notice about the Sun Belt is that this really like highlights the like weaker Power 4 programs. There was a couple of stragglers in the lower tiers like Purdue, but this is like really where it starts to like combine the lower tier Power 4 schools and the higher tier Group of 6 schools. And speaking of higher tier Group of 6 schools, Troy has managed to get promoted twice. They started out in the MAC, and they've already worked their way up to the Sun Belt. And then, on the other hand, Sam Houston started out in the Pac-12 and has managed to get relegated twice down to the Sun Belt. All right, and now let's move on to the American. This is probably one of my favorites. We got Arizona, East Carolina, Jacksonville State, Kentucky, Liberty, Louisiana, Marshall, Miami of Ohio, Texas State, UCF, Virginia Tech, and Wisconsin. An interesting fun fact about this conference in particular is that there is a rep from every real-life conference. Out of this group of 13, all 10 of the real-life conferences are represented at least once. And I like to consider the American to be like the Thunderdome because it's like, for one, the competitive nature in both basketball and baseball season was insane. And even in football season, it was really, really good. Like, the teams that are at the top are usually some of the best teams in the entire country. And so and I think in real life, it would have a very similar effect because this is how you earn your way into what would be considered a power conference. And I think that would be super cool to see. But anywho, some fun facts about the actual teams here. Marshall and Ohio, unfortunately, this is their second relegation as they both started out in the ACC, but have already made their way down to the American, losing their power conference status. And then, as for East Carolina and Texas State, they started this in the American, got promoted to the Sun Belt at some point, relegated to the Sun Belt, and now they're back. And then this is just Liberty's first time being moved. And then Arizona, I believe, started out in the Sun Belt as well, but got promoted twice and is now just a net difference of 1. Now let's go to our first power conference, the Pac-12. Army, Boston College, California, James Madison, Houston, Pittsburgh, Rutgers, UCLA, Utah, Wake Forest, Washington, Washington State, and West Virginia. Once again, kind of like the Mountain West, there is a lot of familiar faces in this new Pac-12. You got Cal, you got UCLA, you got both Washington schools, and you have Utah. And I think that's very, very interesting to see. A fun fact about Army is that Army is one of only 2 schools that has been relegated all 3 seasons, as they started all the way up in the SEC, and now they're all the way down in the Pac-12. Whereas obviously James Madison and Washington only have a net loss of 1. And then we got Boston College, who is also only a net loss of 1, because I believe they started in the ACC as well. And then they got relegated twice, and now they're making their way back up. And then UCLA is slowly progressing back up after I believe they got relegated in the football season, and they have now been promoted twice. On the other hand, Wake Forest is only one of 2 schools that has gotten promoted all 3 seasons. So Wake Forest would have started out in the Mountain West, got promoted to Sun Belt, got promoted to the American, and is now promoted to the Pac-12. And so Wake Forest, I think, is very much a sleeper athletics program, and they are very much proving themselves to be earning that power conference status. And now let's move on to the ACC. Arkansas, Auburn, Baylor, Cincinnati, Iowa, Michigan State, Minnesota, Navy, NC State, North Carolina, Penn State, Tulane, and UNLV. There isn't a ton to say about this group. Auburn just got, I believe this is their net first gain, if I'm not mistaken. And then Cincinnati is in the same boat. Whereas North Carolina has been, I think North Carolina got relegated in North Carolina got relegated early on, and then they've been promoted twice at this point. Also, I made a mistake about Cincinnati. This is actually Cincinnati's second time of being promoted, as they started out in the American, and then they moved their way up, I'm assuming during football season, and then now they're up to the ACC. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have UNLV, who has dropped 2 conferences. So they also started out in the SEC and have since dropped down to the ACC. And then I said Army was one of the teams to get relegated 3 times. Penn State is the other one. Penn State's been relegated all 3 seasons so far. They started all the way up at the very top at the Big Ten, and they've just since then just been dropping. And we'll see if this drop continues. That would be incredibly impressive. Moving on to the Big 12. Colorado, Duke, Kansas, Kansas State, Louisville, Memphis, Missouri, Nebraska, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Syracuse, UConn, and Virginia. Immediately noting, Kansas has been promoted twice. They started out in the Pac-12. They are now all the way up to the Big 12, which they are now matching their real-life conference, and they've earned their way here. And then I'd also like to talk about Virginia, who is the other school other than Wake Forest to have been promoted all 3 seasons. They started out in the American, they got to the Pac-12, the ACC, and now they're here in the Big 12. And I'm so excited to see how their athletics program continues to progress. As for the other 3, Louisville started out here in the Big 12, got promoted, it must have been during basketball season, and then they have now been relegated once again to the baseball, not quite holding up to the same standard. And this is the first time that we see movements from Missouri, South Carolina, and then Nebraska in the positive direction. Moving on to our second last conference, we have the SEC, Boise State, Clemson, Florida, Georgia Tech, Indiana, LSU, Michigan, Notre Dame, Ohio State, TCU, Texas Tech, USC, and Vanderbilt. Now, most of you may be confused. It's like, wait a minute. Why is Indiana, Ohio State, Texas Tech, how did they manage to get down here when their football programs are so strong? Well, that kind of highlights what this exercise is supposed to be about, is that schools who are in the top conferences have very well-rounded athletics, where they are good in both football, basketball, and baseball. Whereas Indiana, Ohio State, and Texas Tech really showed their weakness in their baseball programs, as they could not keep up with the Big Ten competition anymore. And then, whereas Florida, a team that had a very subpar football program, has very strong basketball and baseball. So that at least earns them some level of credibility and allows them to make their way up to the SEC. And Georgia Tech has had a pretty good year. Their baseball was incredibly good. And USC is kind of in the same light, and USC this is actually their second promotion. They started in the ACC, and now they're all the way up in the SEC. And let's go to our final conference, the Big Ten. Alabama, Arizona State, BYU, Georgia, Illinois, Iowa State, Miami, Ole Miss, Oregon, SMU, Tennessee, Texas, and Texas A&M. Let's start out with the obvious ones. Ole Miss and Oregon, welcome back to the Big Ten. They started out here at the very start. I believe they both got relegated because of their basketball, and their baseball has earned their way back. And then this is actually Texas A&M's second promotion. They started out in the Big 12, and they have earned their way all the way back to the Big Ten. And that is going to conclude this video. I hope you guys enjoyed 1 year's worth of the Promotion and Relegation League. Maybe one day they'll implement this in real life. I don't know. But for now, you won't get another update on this until the end of football season, so it's going to be a minute. But I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and see you guys next time.